Good morning, everybody. I am Dr. Julie Lutz, Chief Operating Officer of Eastern Suffolk BOCES and the Chairperson of the Legislative Committee of the Suffolk County School Superintendents. On behalf of that organization and President Yendi Farrelly, I welcome you to our 2022 Advocacy Workshop. Thank you all for taking time out of a Saturday in March to join us this morning. Whether you are joining from home on your own or with the team in one of the 32 districts who are participating with us this morning, we thank you for your commitment to public education and the students in Suffolk County. We have not only district leaders, but we have board members, we have students, and we have all sorts of people who are committed to helping make their districts better in these very critical times. The Legislative Committee has had many conversations this season about what would be appropriate for the advocacy training event. When is the best time to hold the event? Should it be in person or virtual? What should our focus be? As you are aware, it was moved from our typical January date to today. Although our speakers are virtual, many of you are in person in district spaces. Wherever you are, we hope you enjoy the focus for this morning, which is about moving beyond the many months of conversation about pandemic frustrations back to the core of what public education is about. In order to do that, it is imperative that we trust each of the members of our team and are focused on the same things. Before I introduce to you our keynote speaker, I also want to do several other introductions. This is a webinar, so the folks who are on are listed in the webinar, but not available in a Zoom box. But we do have David Wicks, our district superintendent. We also have both Lorraine Deller and Bob Vecchio representing Nassau-Suffolk School Boards Association, and approximately 65 participants representing 32 component school districts. What we will do when Darcy starts her presentation is we will have a Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You can type your questions in there or your comments. I will manage those throughout her presentation. And if it's appropriate to ask them in the midst of her presentation, I will do that. There's also a portion at the end for general questions and an opportunity for Darcy to answer. So very, very excited and appreciative of the fact that Darcy from New York State School Boards Association is willing to be with us this morning and provide us with some guidance on building and perhaps rebuilding teams. Darcy is the Director of Leadership Development for the New York State School Boards Association. In her tenure at NYSBA, Darcy has developed and facilitated numerous training programs, board retreats, as well as developing curriculum for both NYSBA's online and in-person workshops. Darcy has a dozen years of experience as a facilitator with boards of education and has covered many governance topics, such as roles and responsibilities, board operations, goal setting, communication, conflict resolution, board superintendent relations, superintendent board evaluations, and many others. She has delivered several workshops at the National School Board Association national conferences and recently published her third article in the Board Savvy column of the School Administrator. Prior to joining the NYSBA team, Darcy served in many roles in higher education and not-for-profit organizations, developing and delivering professional development and organizational development to help improve individual skill level and team performance. She spent several years conducting and facilitating teams and providing guidance for organizational change initiatives. In addition, Darcy applies her early background in education and psychology to the human dynamics of effective interpersonal engagement and productivity in teams. something that is really critical, as we know, in moving public education forward. Darcy received her bachelor's degree in psychology from the State University of New York in Albany. She received her master's degree in education from Antioch University, New England Graduate School, Keene, New Hampshire. She is passionate about people and education and welcomes the opportunity to work with boards of education on behalf of the children of New York. So what our morning will look like is we will spend approximately 90 minutes on engaging in the work that Darcy is going to walk us through. We then will have a short closing remarks section and a kickoff to the in-district work with your district teams. We will then close the webinar, and your districts and your teams will be able to work on their own. So without further ado, I am going to stop sharing my screen so that Darcy can begin sharing hers. Thank you again, Darcy. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lutz, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad that I've been asked to be here with you this morning to share a little bit about team building, which again, as you know, is part of my expertise, but I'm so thrilled that you're all in person again and you're ready and able to be together. So let me start with sharing my screen with you, and we can all get started in this conversation today. Let's see. So, Julie, could you just acknowledge that?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, excellent. Good, good, good. So, again, I want to say thank you for having me here today. I just wanted to briefly go over with you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about. We're going to do a little bit of introductions, and I know some of you are together at your team, together in your location, and some of you might just be individually on your own computer, on your own screen. So if you're together as a group, I'll ask you to do some introductions with each other, and then we'll just do a couple of minutes of that, and then we'll move on to talking a little bit about team culture and becoming a team, some of the art and/or science of communication, building unity on the team, very important for the sustainability of the team. We'll have a reflection moment toward the end of our time today, and I'll still hold open some time for questions and answers. However, as Dr. Lutz has mentioned, if you have questions along the way, feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and we'll see if we can answer them along the way. So let's get started. Get my cursor in the right position. So if you are together as a group, which I know is so gratifying today since we've spent a lot of time not together, why don't you do a little personal introductions? I have 3 questions here, and you can answer any of them that you wish. Your name and at least what district you're from, one thing your colleagues might not know about you or your teammates might not know about you, or if you don't want to do that question, you could do question number 3, which is if you could wave that magic wand, what would you like to see realized for your students in terms of your advocacy effort? And just I'm going to just time you. So I'm just going to give you about a minute to a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes to share with each other at least 1 or 2 of those things with each other. You can start to bond. This is a very important process for bonding the team together. So why don't you go ahead and do that? I'm going to put a little timer on here for myself, and I'll let you know when your time is up and we need to come back to the screen. So go ahead and introduce yourselves to one another if you haven't done that already. All right, I'm going to ask everyone if they don't mind taking the last few seconds here to finish up their last comments or statements with each other. And I'm going to ask everyone to come back to the screen so we can move on to our next slide. All right, well, I hope I have you all back here on the screen with me. So what does it mean to lead in times of change? We know that we've all been through some very tough times in education with the pandemic and many of the issues that have come that have challenged us. I know that in the world of board service, we have been sort of riding right along beside you with many of these issues, the economic, social, and political issues that have been swirling around. We all are always concerned and involved with what our state standards are, what assessments have and have not been occurring as of late, school safety, student safety, especially in the atmosphere of COVID, making sure we have resources and finances available, and of course the new regulations, some of the ones that came out that were perhaps we weren't quite prepared for, but they were emergency regulations that we all had to deal with. So all of these are big stressors, and they're usually there in some form or another. And sometimes we get overwhelmed with many of them. Sometimes we have a little more stability. But in these last couple of years, we've had a lot of uncertainty. So that's the biggest challenge when you're trying to lead, is having uncertainty. And we certainly have had that over the last couple of years. So how do we manage some of this? And what is the most important thing about leading with a unified team or having unified leadership? And you'll notice even in the picture on the screen, you'll see that there are hands clasped with each other. And that's one of the most important components of being a team and leading together, especially in challenging times, is how do we really work with each other? How do we sort of hold with each other so that we're not feeling isolated or lost or out there by ourselves? And I call it sometimes the weaving of the fabric of the team. How are we weaving ourselves together so that we can be strong no matter what comes, what pushes at us, what pressures we feel, we're still held together. That's an important concept when we think about teams and we think about how we stay unified together or how we're building the team. And very importantly is the team culture, becoming a team and maintaining the type of team that you want to have. So what is a team? You see these four people sitting around the table. They each have a puzzle piece in front of them. They have to figure out how to fit those puzzle pieces together. And it's very important when we think about that we consider who we are. So the group of individuals who have come together with a strong sense of mutual commitment, they operate collaboratively, they're accountable for their performance, and they work towards a common goal. Those four things you can consider the pillars of your work together as a team, the thing that you want to make sure you're all there working actively together on doing. So that mutual commitment, who are we? What are we here for? How are we going to operate together? Are we going to be accountable? And what does that look like? And what is our performance? And are we continuing to work toward our common goals? Those are all very important pieces of becoming a team. The other thing that we know from many, many years ago, back in the 1970s, when I was studying psychology, so I'm dating myself here a little bit, but this is a long-standing piece of research, the Tuckman Model, about group team development. And it has a tremendous amount of research behind it, and it still stands today. So groups, whether you're a group, a team of any sort, you come together and you form. This is when we don't really know each other yet. And then we start to know each other, and we might come through this storming stage, meaning we might have different views, different opinions, different passions, and we might see ourselves butting our heads up against one another or not disagree or not agreeing with one another. And that's all okay. We're just learning how to be together, who we are together. And then eventually we start to do what's called norming. And norming is about coming together and finding the common ground, the rules that we're going to work together, what we're about, what are our values, etc. I often say, imagine you're a baseball team and you're out on the field. If you don't know what the rules are, you don't know what your position is, and you don't know how to play the game, you'll have a very poor performing baseball team. It's when we all come together and we know how to play the game and we know how to do it well together through practice and forming good habits, then we then become the high performing team, which then just operates very smoothly, almost like you can tell what the next word is going to be coming out of your partner's or your teammate's mouth, and you almost can finish each other's sentences, so to speak. So a well-performing team has sort of like that synergy and that energy of just sort of knowing how to get things done. They understand the rules, they understand what we're about, etc. You might do some reforming if you got new members on the team. And so a good orientation for anyone who's new is always good. And then you may come through the storming stage again a little bit and some of the norming stage as the new people get to know who they are and what we're about. And then you'll eventually get to the performing stage again. But hopefully with a good orientation for anybody who's new on the team, that will come through rather quickly. So let's talk about culture. Now we have organizational culture up here, but it's team culture, organizational culture, school culture, any kind of culture. How are you going to build your culture on your team? That's important because culture is almost stronger or is stronger than some of the strategies we put into place. So if we don't have a good sense of how we work together, we're not going to be able to perform well together. And I always say culture can be intentionally built by a good understanding of our ground rules, our norms, behaviors of expectation, how our roles are, what our roles are, what's important to us in terms of the values and or the goals that we have and what we're setting out as priorities. If we don't intentionally really make those things clear, what we get is culture by default, which means whatever happens, happens. And so you could have a dominating member on your team. They could really drive the culture of that team. And then that is the culture of your team. And people might feel shut out. They might feel dominated. They might feel like they never have a voice. They might feel like this is not the direction I really had thought we were going to go in. And all of a sudden you start to find conflict on the team. So it's really important that we be very intentional about how we want to be together as a team, what our values are, what our beliefs are, what's important to us to accomplish. And the simplest things like, how are we going to speak at our group meeting? So if we're at an advocacy team meeting and we're discussing something, we want to really talk about how do we even communicate? Are we just going to be free for all? Are we going to raise our hands? Are we going to be called on by the chair, etc.? Those are important things because that starts to shape the culture of your team. So I'm going to ask you just in your own minds or in your own group, if you're in a group, to jot down on a piece of paper, what are the characteristics of a unified high-performing team? And what are the issues or obstacles of a negative performing team? So if you could just take a moment and write down what you think some of those things are. We'll let you take a moment to share that with each other, and then I'll come back and I'll give you sort of a review of what I think. So I'm going to give you about 60 seconds to do that with each other. Okay, so I'm going to ask everyone to come back and see if we can regroup ourselves back here at the screen with me. I apologize if you really didn't have enough time to share all of this with each other. It's a little hard to gauge when we're working virtually and we're not with you in person to have a handle on how much dialogue and conversation you need to finish out the questions in front of you. But let me go over a little bit of what we know to be a good working relationship for high performing teams. And you can, there are many places where you can go to get more information about how to work well together as a good team. Patrick Lencioni, Overcoming the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, is a great resource. I'm sure many of you know about his work. But let me tell you, this would be inclusive of what he says, and in addition to some of the other pieces that I've put together for you, we certainly know that when you have trust with your team members, that this is one of the essential foundational pieces of being a good team and working together, being open and honest with your thoughts and actions, that level of transparency. but also knowing that your other teammates can trust you as well and that you have each other's back. That's a very big piece of being able to get through some of the tough times together. Respect, understanding what does mutual respect look like for each other, finding solutions with good insight, wisdom, and creativity, making sure you're willing to hear each other so that we are not feeling like anybody is left out of the conversation. Self-awareness, a very big piece. Sometimes I call this your emotional intelligence, meaning that you're taking responsibility. You know how your words or your actions might influence or impact other people. Making sure that we're inclusive, that we really consider differences and different cultures and add on something that we welcome and that we can really feel like they bring something different to the table, perhaps. And what is that talent or strength that can really add to our team? And open communication, making sure that we hold open to those good relationships, to that honest communication, whether it be in an email or whether it be in person. We want to make sure that we have good communication skills. Communication, believe it or not, maybe this is self-evident, but when I work with boards of education, communication is one of the quickest, fastest things, poor communication, that would break down trust on a team. So that's sometimes one of the first places we go when we look at rebuilding trust on a team is what are our communication processes? And do we need to reestablish good communication protocols? So I'm going to ask you all just to take a look at this picture on the screen. And I'm going to ask you, what do you see in this picture? And I'm going to give you 10 or so seconds just to take a look at it. All right, now some of you might be seeing a young girl with a bonnet in a pretty dress and some of the ribbons falling down the back of her hair. And some of you might be seeing an old lady with a big nose and a big smile across her face and a bonnet on her head. And so the ear of the girl, if you're seeing the girl, is the eye of the old woman. And the choker necklace of the girl is the smile, the lips of the old woman. And the dress, the collar of the dress is really the bottom of the chin of the old woman. So I'm trying to point these things out to you so you can see both pictures. So you could see both perspectives, both sides. That's obviously very important when you're working together with other people. And this image, this illusionary image, so to speak, helps demonstrate to us that some people see one thing one way and other people see it a different way. And we often can see things differently because we are different people, right? So when I went through my study for the MBTI training, which is the Myers-Briggs personality assessment work, we got to really understand that people not only see things differently, they take it in, they process it differently, they make sense out of it differently, and they will respond to it differently, usually all based on some of their personality that's inherent to them and some of their life experience that they have had along the way. So there's no judgment of right or wrong here about how we see it or what we see, but really we have to just acknowledge that we see things differently. So when you're working together as a team, whether you're a small group or a large group, everybody is going to see that information and may very well take it in very differently, make sense out of it differently, and respond to it differently. So what we have to learn how to do is stop arguing over who's right or wrong about a certain issue, but really start hearing or understanding each other's stories or perspective about what we are seeing. And of course, that adds to the richness of what we bring to the table in terms of different perspectives and thought that go to building the best possible decision that we could make regarding our kids and the future for our kids. So it's all good, right? It's all about building perspective. It's sort of like a construction site where we're building a building or whatnot. We're putting in the building blocks to build a better decision, to build better advocacy for our kids. So just keep that in mind. And I'm going to talk a little bit with you about sources of conflict, because this should be something that, especially for the leaders of your advocacy team, but for all of you as well, to really consider along the way. What could be tripping you up? What could bring possible conflicts to your advocacy team? When we go in and we work with a Board of Education or any team, we usually use something like this as a diagnostic tool. We're going to say, these are the structural pieces of any team. What's going on with this team? We would want to look at your roles and your responsibilities and say, is it clear what their roles are? Do they know what they are? Is it clear what their process is? Do they understand their protocols, their procedures, their processes, et cetera? That could be for communication, decision-making, putting something into action, et cetera. What is the direction of this team? Do they really understand what their goals are and what the priorities are? Maybe what some of the sub-goals are, who's taking action, when they're doing it, et cetera. That's got to be clear for everybody to really work in alignment together. And then lastly, the interpersonal relationships. How well are we getting along with each other? Like earlier I said, like the weave of the fabric, how well are we getting along with each other? Have we taken out a little bit of time to get to know each other, some socialization time, sometimes having some time just to have a meal together and talk with each other. That's important for us to see each other beyond just seeing what we call an object. We want to know each other, not just objectify people. Once we start to objectify, we start to lose a sense of our humanity with each other. And so it's really important that we have good interpersonal relationships with one another. So if you're wondering, how can I strengthen my team? How can I build my team? You might want to look at these 4 lenses and say, where do we need to really do some work so that we can operate better together as a team? Also, here are some other things that you might also want to consider when you think about how do we really build our team together. For instance, I know that you all will be looking at a couple of things here later today. When you do your district planning template has a couple of questions, which I think are great. How do we regroup and focus on student needs? How do we reconnect to our goals in this new normal? All those are great questions for you to begin to ask yourself. And here are some others in the boxes to the right. Who are we? Okay, who are we? Do we understand who we are as an advocacy team? What is our direction? Where are we going? I kind of mentioned that already. And why does it matter, right? Why does it matter? What is it that we're really trying to accomplish? And what does it feel like? This goes back to some of that cultural piece about how we want to work together. And what can we do to ensure everyone knows where they fit? So again, this is really acknowledging that we're all included in this team, that we all understand what we bring to the table, our talents, our skills, our knowledge, and can we do this well with empathy and a sense of compassion for one another as we really embrace ourselves in this new normal, working for our kids, perhaps more importantly than ever. And what will be the reward the system will give you for your outcome? So this is important for maintaining momentum and what I call sometimes the good morale, which is how do we acknowledge each other and sort of praise, the good work that we're doing together here as we advocate for our kids. So keeping the team together is important by acknowledging what we're doing, acknowledging what we're doing well. And sometimes it doesn't always have to be what we're doing well, but acknowledging the resiliency we have had over these past 2 years to be where we are today. And that's very important because a long-standing team is going to have times of challenge, and being able to come through the challenge will help us build resiliency as a team. So just like we as individuals have self-esteem that we build over times of challenge, that we learn how to be resilient or accomplish things, the same thing is with a group of people coming together as a team. You will have times of challenge, you'll overcome it and build your resiliency, and you will have self-esteem together as a group for knowing and having confidence in your own performance together as a team. So it's important to acknowledge that, especially at this point where you have really endured and you have really come through these last 2 very challenging years of the pandemic. So just a little bit more to speak about team expectations, because these are some of the things that you might want to consider ongoing as you're working together as a team. These are pretty typical standard things that we do, like helping establish a common vision or establish the goals. They really do help you understand your unity of purpose. That's sort of where you want to hang your hat. You want to always make sure that you understand that as part of your visionary look forward into the future. And clearly defining those roles, responsibilities, just as I said, and behavioral norms continues to ground you or hold what I call the container of how we will be together and how we kind of manage things as we go forward. Clear processes, communication, like I said, make sure that you understand what those communication protocols look like. Effectively working to build trust and mutual respect. Again, very foundational. If you can take out a little bit of time every once in a while just to check in with each other. How did we do today with today's meeting? Is there any areas of improvement that you think we can do, et cetera? That's always important to help you evaluate the team so that you're continually looking to your own improvement over time. These are important pieces that help maintain teams as you move forward from one year to the next. So let's talk a little bit about communication. And we call it an art or science primarily because there are some real clear things we know about communication from the science. And we are also aware that it takes an art or skill and experience to really learn how to communicate well. So let's talk a little bit more about how do we do that. Sometimes I think I was blessed because my mom was an art teacher and my dad was a science teacher. So I feel like I got a little bit of both from them, and that has really helped me, I think, learn how to do my job well today. So let's talk a little bit about some of what we know about communication. Communication is a 7-38-55 split. So what does that mean? Now, you might find some differences in the science about this, but it's basically generally about the same. 55% of your communication really comes from your non-verbal behavior, right? We all know when our mom, when we were kids, would call our name and she would be standing there with her arms crossed across her chest. We knew that was a very different message than when she sat there and held her arms open, ready to embrace us, right? Behavior can really communicate a very large percentage of the message. We also know that tone and inflection also communicates a fair amount of the messaging. Again, just remember when your mom called you when she was really angry at you, sometimes she might even use your middle name. Do you ever have that? John Paul Patrick, instead of just calling you Johnny, good boy, Johnny, come see me. So tone and inflection really matter. And then, of course, the vocabulary, the words that actually come out of your mouth. But see how they're only 7%? So what you say sometimes is not as important as how you say it. And so it's very important when you're communicating that you have a certain awareness, self-awareness of what you do when you do say what you need to say. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit more about communication in terms of conflict, and we'll get to that. But one of the first things that happens when we're communicating is we're getting a message, right? Remember the old game called telephone, when we would whisper in each other's ears around the circle, and by the time we got to the end, the person who then finally told us what the message was very different than what it started out to be when the first person spoke it in their neighbor's ear. So what we hear and what we listen to and what we hear can sometimes be two very different things. So when we are listening, we might be hearing the words, but when we're really, really hearing or understanding someone, we really are taking in what's important to them in the message. So I'm going to give you a couple of, a note here or a little slide here that's just going to give you 6 key active listening skills. I'm just going to let you take a look at these 6 things here for a second and just reflect on them for a few seconds. Okay. So everyone's probably familiar with when we might be in an argument with someone. We're not really listening or hearing them. We are really preparing the debate in our head for how to respond to them. When that's happening, of course, you know you're not really hearing or listening to somebody. So one of the first key active listening skills is to pay attention, to really be present, to not be thinking about what you're going to respond to the speaker who's speaking to you. You're going to try to keep your mind open and withhold judgment from what they're saying, but really hear and try to understand what they're saying. You might reflect on it for a few minutes or a few seconds, depending on the conversation. You might have to ask a clarifying question, which might be, can you tell me more about that? Or I didn't quite understand this piece. What do you really mean by that? Can you further explain that? And then you might want to summarize what they've said to you. And sometimes I do that by saying, well, let me really reflect back to you what I've heard so I understand you correctly. And then you might want to share a little bit further and go deeper into that understanding so that you really understand what's important to that person beyond what they might have just shared with you. So these are key pieces. Now, in every interchange we have, you might not be doing all of these things, but you certainly can practice how to be a little bit more present, a little bit more reflective, and ask those clarifying questions when you need to, because sometimes that's the piece that we don't do when we quickly respond to somebody's comment. And sometimes that gets us into trouble because then there's a lot of misunderstanding that will occur. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the science, okay, the primal and the modern brain. If you read a book called Crucial Conversations, you'll learn and understand a little bit more about this, but that's where this image actually comes from. And some of the science that I've read about, actually, I've read in this book. And so what's actually happening when we hear something that we find a little bit threatening, what happens to our brain is we immediately drop back into the primal brain where we feel the fight, flight, or freeze response. And we are automatically, physiologically brought into this space where we feel like we have to do one of those 3 things. That's because the adrenaline starts to run in our body. So physically, something is actually happening to your body where you're going to feel a heightened sense of your own physiology. Your heart might start beating faster. Your palms might be getting sweaty. You might get a little sweat on your brow. You're probably going to have more difficulty thinking because what's happening is the actual blood in the brain is draining from the frontal cortex, where the thinking part of the brain is, to the back part of the brain. And so you're not even able to think as clearly. So you might not even be getting the entire message from the person who's trying to communicate with you if you suddenly feel threatened or frightened, or in some way feel like your security is in jeopardy. So there's physiologically things that are happening in your system when you feel threatened that will make it more difficult for you in times of conflict or in heated debate with one another. So what we usually tell people is a few things. One, when you're in conversation with each other, there's a difference between debate and dialogue. And I know we use those words interchangeably a lot, but there's an important difference between them. When we're debating someone, it is generally a little bit more of an aggressive stance. We're trying to coerce someone or influence them heavily to our side of the issue. Okay? There's a time and a place for that. And when we're on a team, we're usually trying to dialogue, though. And dialogue means we're trying to participate in a conversation that's not quite as threatening as a debate. We're trying to share ideas, trying to share perspective, trying to hold an open mind, try to be influenced and influence others. That doesn't mean that I'm aggressively trying to get you to think along the same lines that I do, but I am sharing my perspective and asking you to be open-minded to see, hear, or understand my perspective. And sometimes I might be influenced by that. And sometimes we'll come to a better understanding and a better decision because of it. That's the great work of a team, really. So when you are in the position in which you feel as though people are debating you more than they are in dialogue with you, what you can do is slow that process down to try to take it more into a debate, into a dialogue. So when you start to feel like your palms are getting sweaty, or you're starting to feel frightened by somebody's aggressive stance, you might say, you know what? I really think that I need to understand you better. Can you explain more to me about what's important to you about this issue? Or, I think I need to just take a breath and really reflect on what you're saying so that I could get a better handle on what it is you're really trying to share with me. Or maybe you ask other questions of inquiry. Can you find more information that might bring that to light for me? Once we start to get each other out of the reactionary stance and back into the frontal cortex of thinking and explaining without the threat of having to be on my side of the issue, we're able to slow down and decrease the adrenaline in our bodies. And that helps us be able to think with each other rather than debate the issue with each other. So I hope I'm making myself a little bit clear on this issue. I'm happy to take any questions you might have. But again, I refer back to the Crucial Conversations book. If you want to really get into this a little bit more, they can explain this to you better. Essentially, what we're trying to get everybody to do is to be a bit more open-minded. That's generally the whole point here, is how can we really hear new ideas and concepts, really not shutting people down, not mocking each other's beliefs. It's really important that we give each other respect. I can ask you questions rather than make assumptions. That's very important. There's a lot of research on how we as human beings jump to assumptions. We need to step back, probably ask more questions instead. We want to be able to consume a wide variety of information that generally makes our decision-making stronger and more inclusive. We also want to make sure that I allow myself to expand and be able to be influenced. I mean, people generally don't think that that's a great idea. We all are so independent-minded, but usually allowing oneself to be influenced builds your capacity to understand and make better decisions.
Darcy, I have a question.
Great.
What happens if the other party doesn't want to engage in a positive interaction?
Well, that's a very good question. So sometimes we have to ask the other person directly if you feel like you're not getting from them that kind of engagement, you might want to stop and say, what I would really like to do instead of debate this issue is to really understand you. Can you take a step back instead of repeating your position to me about this? Can you tell me a little bit more about why it's so important to you? Because I really do want to understand why it's important to you. One of the things that happens when people get into that place where they shut down is they don't believe that you have their interests at heart. And when people don't believe that you have my interests at heart, we're going to be defended. But when we can really come together and believe that I have your interests at heart and you have mine, we're more open to sharing and being with you in the dialogue. So that can be one strategy. And I would suggest that to be your first strategy, to really try to bring down the escalation. If it's starting to escalate, slow down your voice, make your voice softer, calmer, and really ask them, I really want to understand you better. Can you tell me a little bit more about why this is important to you? Try to get them off the defensive posturing. If you have a long-standing issue with someone where they continue to be like belligerent and they're not willing at all to come along with you, to be in a good dialogue with you, and they're just continuing to be more what I might call destructive in the communication patterning, then you might have to be just very clear with them about what you're willing to accept in terms of the protocols for communication. You could remind them of what the protocols are. If you feel like they're being, excuse me, I have to take a sip of water. You could remind them of what your communication protocols are if you've got them established. You could also say to them, you know, I'd like to remain respectful in our conversation. And for me, respectful conversation would be that we don't do X, Y, and Z, or that we hold open to each other's opinion. And I would like you to also hear my opinion, as I'm willing to hear your opinion, but I'm looking for a resolution. I'm looking for common ground with you. Are you open and willing to find that common ground with me? So sometimes it's sort of like reminding them of the process, procedures, or protocols, and asking them if they're willing to engage with you on that level or with those terms, and not just in their defensive stance or posturing. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, good. So just to call out, I found out we have the St. Joseph's graduate class in school law and ethics joining us this morning because one of our superintendents is teaching. So you are also influencing future leaders. So great work, lots of information. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So as we go a little bit further, one of the things that we also know is, honestly, you can have any conversation you want, as difficult as it might seem from the get-go. If you establish rules of safety and everybody's willing to abide by them, which might be some of the agreements you may have to have with your team before you get started, you can have any conversation you want, even the most difficult. So people would have to be willing, however, to monitor their own emotions as well as others. Everybody has to sort of take responsibility for themselves and be responsible for yourselves as a group, as a team, and be willing to acknowledge when somebody else might be a little bit destructive in their communication, that we gently but willingly say to each other, hey, you know, maybe we're getting a little outside of what we consider our standard protocols for communication. Why don't we slow down a little bit? Or why don't we come back and remind ourselves what our communication protocols are so we can maintain the safety in our environment? So that's one of the biggest things to having what could be a difficult conversation. You must be willing to maintain safety in your communication, which means we're not going to call each other names. We're not going to be abusive or volatile in our language. We might not even want to raise our voice. Okay. So one of the things that's not up on this screen is taking things personally. And the reason why I bring that up is because one of the things that will almost immediately take us out of the feeling safe position is when we feel like we are taking something personally. If I take what you say to me personally, I might feel attacked. And when I feel attacked, I'm going to have to put up my barriers. So very important that we not take things personally. We're here to be in the dialogue. We're here to discuss the issues. We're discussing the issue, not the person who's saying that particular sentence. Very important that we not attack each other. Pause when emotions run high, right? As soon as they start to escalate, the adrenaline is running. Bring your physiology back down to a calm space. One of the things that we know, even from when I've done counseling with folks way back in the day, is you have to keep your voice calm, keep the dialogue open. If you start to lose your composure, take a breath, refocus. Sometimes I even say, you know what? I just have to sort of take a minute. And can you repeat what you just said to me again? Because I realized my adrenaline started to run, my thinking started to get depleted because the blood started running out of my prefrontal cortex, and I have to get that blood back up there in that prefrontal cortex so I could really hear you. So don't be shy. Tell people, hey, can I just have a minute? Let me take a breath. Can you restate what you just said? And then think to yourself, what is my purpose? Would I say this to another person if you're thinking of saying something that might not really be your best self? Would I really want to say that? Give yourself a moment to think about what you're going to say and to really process it through first, okay? Also, to restore safety, if things do get out of hand, it's okay to restore safety. It's okay to say, hey, I think I really stepped over the line. I apologize. Let's kind of step back. Let me restate that in a different way. So don't forget, you can always ask, you can mirror back to people, you can also paraphrase, you can ask to say it again, you can summarize, ask for good reflection if you've got the message correct, or never hesitate to just apologize if you feel like you stepped over the line. The most important thing here is you want to create safety in your team, and you want to be able to repair that safety if it's been broken. So when we talk about unity, some people assume sometimes that unity just happens, like culture just happens. It doesn't just happen. Just like I said earlier, culture just doesn't happen. You have to build it intentionally. You have to really make an investment. And building unity is the same thing. Building unity is really a choice. It's really, am I choosing to become part of a team, or am I just choosing to be a group of individuals and I'm going to, I say selfishly with quote marks, am I selfishly going to just go after my own agenda in this group? That's not really being a team member, however. That's just you having your own agenda and trying to manipulate others with that agenda. Having a unified leadership means that we come together under a common vision and common goals, and we're all really willing to work toward those common vision and toward those common goals, and be able to willing to work together as the team in the way in which we decide as a team we're going to work together. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Lencioni's book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, has outlined those dysfunctions, and obviously the opposite would be the better thing to do. So if you have an inattention to results, you're not going to be, if you have an inattention to results, you are going to be only in pursuit of your own goals. Your own personal status erodes and the focus on the collective success erodes. Okay, so like I said earlier, the self and your own agenda is not as important as the collective agenda. If you're on a team, not if you're just individually working toward your own goal, that's a different thing. The avoidance of accountability. Avoiding interpersonal discomfort prevents a team from holding one another accountable. So making sure that you push each other to the edge a little bit. We can get a little uncomfortable with each other. We can sort of push each other to be better, right? We can say to each other, hey, let's really work within our communication protocols and not not try to take that defensive posture. We're better than that. You all can agree to those terms, and you all can help each other get there.
Darcy, I have a comment in the Q&A, but I think it's a nice one to share, right? So Robert Doyle is sharing that during his school district business leader studies, they used the book Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott in one of their classes. So the fact that pre-service leadership training is now focusing on these things, I think is really important. So thank you for including it.
Absolutely. Lack of commitment, the lack of clarity or buy-in that team members have will make it more difficult for people to stick to the decisions that we make. This is very common when we work with boards of education, and it's common on any team. If we don't really get buy-in from everybody around the table, it's going to be more difficult after the meeting is over for people to stick with the decision, or for people not to want to pull away from the decision later, and maybe they're going to do something sort of ancillary that's not going to really help support the decision as well as we might thought. So it's important that everybody have clear buy-in to the what and the why we're doing what we're doing, so that afterward we can stick to the commitment and understand why we're doing it. This sometimes happens where people have an artificial harmony because they're really too afraid to deal with what we call the elephant in the room, right? Really deal with the real problem, the real issue at hand. And so you could have what looks like harmony on the surface, but when things start to get really difficult, what you'll see is a split or a divide in the team. And suddenly you'll have one group arguing against the other group, and it's going to be very difficult to resolve. So we need to make sure that we're not just acting as if, that we really are willing to debate or really deal with the tough issues at hand so that we can resolve them and come to a good solution, and that we're not just sort of glossing things over. And of course, the absence of trust. So there's a good point that Lencioni makes here, which I think is really important for any of us. This is a real life skill. It's not even just a team skill. So when we think of ourselves as being vulnerable, vulnerability, do we think of that as a strength, or do we think of that as a weakness? And most people at first glance would say it's a weakness, but really vulnerability is a strength. In some ways, it's allowing you to be authentic about who you are or what you think, but the team has to be safe, and you have to be feeling safe in your team to be vulnerable, to really speak your truth, to be able to feel like you're going to be heard in that truth, not attacked in that truth, and that the group is willing to respect what you say. And when we're able to even also be able to say, I'm sorry, or I did something wrong, I made a mistake, I can do better, let me at least show you how I can do better. All of those statements are vulnerable statements, but they're also really strengths. Because what happens, we know, like when we're raising children, right? Everybody makes mistakes and they learn from them. And where does the strength come from? Learning from the mistake. When a child is learning how to walk and they fall down 10 times, at least, before they're able to take their steps, we don't criticize them for falling down those 10 times. We help them up and we say, great, take that next step. And we cheer them on because they're learning how to be better at what they do. And it's the same thing with a team. We've got to trust each other that sometimes we might make mistakes, but we don't have to be fearful that when we make a mistake, that we can't also grow and learn and become still part of the team as the team is growing and becoming better at what they do. So that vulnerability is really not a weakness. It's really a strength. Remember earlier, I talked about resiliency. Can't get resilient unless you make mistakes and learn from them and learn how to grow from them. And of course, consensus building and consensus making is always part of us building that sense of unity together and building, of course, the the atmosphere of trust and respect with each other. So building consensus doesn't mean that everybody absolutely agrees on every inch of the issue that we're debating. It is hopefully, though, a process in which everyone can understand the issues and where we are on them, where at some point you'll say, well, I can agree to the decision that we're making, and yes, I will support it. So I want you to read what's under the two blocks, the green block about what builds consensus and the red block about what blocks consensus. I'm going to give you like 10 seconds to read that. So I've been in groups where we've done consensus building and where there's been a lot of debate back and forth on the issues, where we can spend an hour, 2 hours debating not debating, I don't want to say debating, but dialoguing around certain issues with people that have very divergent opinions, okay? And we've had to come to a decision. And we did actually come to a decision as we were working together as a group. But there were some folks that you couldn't say, would be really in the same skin as me on the issue. And it was really okay. And I really respected them for that. And they really told me and the group, where they stood. And it wasn't in the same place that I stood. And yet we were able to really uncover what was important to them about that issue, what was important to me about that issue, but still find some kind of a solution that worked for both of us, right? That's consensus, that we all are willing to at least agree. I understand it, I can agree to it, and I will support it. But that person didn't think exactly like Barcy, right? But we still were able to come to some consensus. So we want to make sure under the green box that we have some common vision and some common goals. We're guided by core values. That's really important. It doesn't mean that I have to exactly agree on everything, but I do have the same core values about the issue. And we can constructively challenge each other, which is what we were doing. We were giving each other time and space to really understand that issue for each of us. And we had ultimately the ability to let go of my own personal ego around being right or having you stand exactly in my shoes about the issue. No, I was willing to stand in your shoes for a little while you were willing to stand in my shoes for a while so we could understand each other. And then I could still go back to my own shoes and still agree to the decision because I knew it was the best decision for the entity, for the entirety, for the group as a whole, for the kids as a whole, for the district as a whole, okay? So there's a certain amount of emotional maturity that needs to occur there. So I'm not always just engaged in my own personal ego, okay? There's a difference. There's the small I, which is my own personal ego, and then there's the larger I, which is the collective ego, the collective consciousness of the group that's making a decision for the best interest of the children. And I have to have a certain amount of maturity to get to that collective ego and let go of my own personal ego. That's a great team when a team can do that. So what blocks it? Lack of trust, lack of transparency, sharing your individual understandings, feelings, belief. My own individual need to push my own personal agenda, which is attached to my personal ego. Failure to listen or consider other alternatives or others' opinions, and assert the will of the majority onto the minority. So when we don't, the reason why we use parliamentary procedures is to make sure that the minority gets their voice. And you should also make sure that you're doing that as well. Never run over the top of the minority opinion. You'll lose consensus if you do that. All righty. So I'd like for you to take a reflective moment here with me, and I'm going to show you this next slide. And I usually get a little giggle from folks in the audience when I do this with people in person. I just did this the other night with a Board of Education, and they all giggled. Because what we're really seeing here is often what we naturally as humans do. You know, we see ourselves sometimes better, younger, slimmer, maybe than we actually are, because we all want to be that, but we're not necessarily always that. And so what we're really asking of you, whenever we're in a good dialogue or on a team or in a relationship, to try to openly and honestly see ourselves. And what's very natural and common for us as human beings, we judge ourselves by our own intentions, but we judge others by their behavior. And sometimes it's harder for us to judge our own behavior when it's not the best behavior, but others are judging us by our behavior. So be clear if your behavior is a little offensive to others, and sometimes people will point it out to us, but even if they don't, sometimes it's helpful to share your intention behind your behavior. If your behavior was a little bit offensive, let people know even sometimes ahead of time what your intention is behind the words that you're going to speak next, because sometimes it's important to share transparently what is in here as you speak it, or sometimes if your behavior has not been the best, share your intentions behind it, help people understand where you're coming from. But remember that we tend to give ourselves a little bit more slack than we give others. So make sure you're perceiving yourselves as others perceive you. All right. So in that reflection, it might also be good for you to think about, if I could do one thing to support my team better in terms of my own self, my own behavior, or what I bring to the table, or the talents that I could bring to the table, what might they be to help my team be a better team? So this is about taking self-responsibility. It's a lot of what we talked about in terms of Lencioni's work, etc. How do I show up to be the best person I can be, a leader on the team, one of many, so that my team can be a better team? And I'm going to let you think about that for a few minutes while I share with you in my closing here a little story. So this is the story of the monkey trap. And I asked the question, how can one easily catch a monkey? And I'm going to show you this next slide that's going to give you probably a little indication of how we can do that. So you see the monkey here on the screen, and the monkey has his or her hand in a gourd, and the gourd is got a chain leading it to the stake in the ground. And this is literally how, in some places, they've been able to catch a monkey. And so why do I show you this picture, and what can you make sense out of it given everything that we've been talking about today? One of the things I will say is that we can get trapped in certain things. Emotionally, we can get trapped in certain things. And what happens to the monkey is we put something attractive to the monkey inside the gourd, usually some food. And the monkey goes to the gourd, sniffs it, looks at it, decides that they like it and they want it, or they're hungry enough, and they put their hand into the hole of the gourd, and with their fist, they grab the food and they make a fist and they hold on to the food because they want the food. They want to get it out of the gourd. But the hole of the gourd is too small for them to pull their fist out, and they're just holding on, and they can't get their fist out because they won't let go. And so when we don't let go of certain things, we get trapped, just like the monkey gets trapped. And until we can learn how to release and let go of that thing, whatever it is, whatever opinion perhaps we're holding on to or perspective we're holding on to, we can't let go and we can't get our hand out of the gourd to become untrapped from the thing that we're holding on to. And so you can see that obviously what we're trying to say here with this metaphor is that we sometimes need to reconsider and let go of our perspective and be open-minded to what is being talked about within our group or in our team, so that we might be influenced a little bit to be open to what else might occur for this decision to be made for the best decision of all our kids. And so I ask you to think about the monkey trap the next time you feel very caught in a dialogue with someone in which you feel like you guys can't move forward, and maybe bring up the monkey trap and say, hey, maybe we could all let go a little bit of our individual position and think about how we can be a little bit more open-minded to be influenced by each other so that we can come away with the best decision for our kids. So I will leave it there with you and ask you if you have any questions for me.
So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. As people are developing their questions, Darcy, I just want to really reflect on how well you, first of all, helped us to understand the why of why team functioning is critical, right? There's so much work that we need to do in all sorts of leadership team spaces and public education. And then really walking us through the how to get to that, as I turn on my video, to get to that space. And most importantly, the role that communication plays in that, and understanding, what we bring to the table, the things that maybe we're reluctant to let go of, the importance of keeping a mindset of, caring for the people that we're listening to, and, setting up a culture where they also are caring for us. And ultimately, we're all caring for, the goal of public education, which is really making sure the students are having what they need. So really appreciate all of that you have laid out so nicely for us, as well as the resources, the couple of books that you mentioned. One of the questions here from Bob Doyle, and I can actually answer, as you may have answered this already, but are you able to make this presentation available to us via email? So it has been recorded. We will save that recording and let the people who registered know where it is, probably on both the Eastern Suffolk BOCES as well as our Suffolk County School Superintendents Association's website. So folks can use it, walk their own teams through it again. If you couldn't get your team together, if there's other teams that you think it would be critical for. Other comments in the Q&A, great job, Darcy. That's from Bob Vecchio. Thank you for all this great information that was shared. Great presentation. Thank you. It's been a couple of years of understanding the importance that communication is key in a space where communication needed to shift to ways that we weren't really used to carrying it on. So I think although we've gotten better at that, it has required intentional work on the part of certainly school boards and school district teams and school leaders. So very, very appreciative of the partnership that New York State School Boards has with the superintendents in the state, and really the exceptional professional development that your organization, with you in that position, have pushed out in this time, which has been very, very helpful. So any other questions that folks have for Darcy about anything related to her her presentation, or other questions on team building that perhaps weren't brought up? Feel free to put them in the Q&A.
Yeah, and I would just like to make sure I leave everyone with the very basic building of a team is to establish your ground rules. So what are they? What are those common expectations you have for each other as you show up to be part of the team? And it could be a very simple list. It could be more expansive depending on how far you want to take it. But that's a very simple foundation that would be great for any team.
Good. Thank you for that and for the tools to do that. Okay, so we are running a little bit ahead of schedule, but as it's a Saturday morning, I'm sure people will not be bothered by that. So I'm going to bring on now Mr. John Dolan, Superintendent of East Islip, and Dr. Tim Egan, Superintendent of Kings Park, who are going to do some closing remarks and set you up for your team work. So let me do that. Okay.
Can you hear me, Julie?
Yeah, you guys are on. There's Tim with his team and district. All right, turn it over to you, Tim and John.
All right, Tim, you ready? I'll go.
You got it, my friend.
All right, thanks, buddy. First of all, Darcy, I think you deserve a virtual round of applause, standing ovation. Let's get up.
Yeah.
You did a great job, and you inspired my folks. They want to do this together, and then they also want to do it with the administrative team, which will create some continuity. I'm gonna deviate for a second there, Tim, because this woman had the outlandish audacity to think she could put me in front of a microphone and I could get done in less than 20 minutes. Let's see if she was right. But she said something about asking why, and what Julie does is, it's like herding cats. Cats are beautiful creatures, but superintendents have, passion and they care. But oh boy, sometimes they go in a million different directions. But Julie has never given up on us, and she consistently says, come on now, guys, sit down. Julie is that intelligent younger sister that we all needed. But, most people don't know this. She changed her driver's license to sneak into bars at a young age. But Julie's going to be moving on. I don't think Julie's going to be around. She'll always be in our hearts, but I have a feeling she's going to keep showing up, because Julie just never gives up on us, whether it's a book group, the monthly meetings for the clusters. But Julie cares so passionately about her family, but kids, and the biggest kids of all, superintendents. She keeps us moving in the right direction. And I know she's going to be there to support Ryan as they transition. But let's give Julie a nice big round of applause for just always being there for us. Now, on to the program. Again, outlandish audacity. Julie Lutz thought she could put me in front of a microphone, and I know she's got her timer on. I have no musical talent, but I love lyrics.
John, I just have to point out, I also have the ability to remove you from this.
And the board pointed that out to me this morning too. But anyway, Jerry Lee Lewis, one of the icons of rock and roll, he had a line in one of his songs. Why does my bucket have a hole in it? And the last couple of years, we've all been walking around with buckets, and we've maybe felt a little sorry for ourselves because our bucket schools always do, because schools can never have enough, nor should they have everything they want, because life is about learning and working harder. So when you hear the words, why does my, the word, when he sings, why does my bucket have a hole in it? It means you just got to get up every day and keep working. And you've got to work harder than the hole in the bucket. And you got to keep filling that bucket. And the bucket is education. Education is the answer to everything. I'll jump over to Peter Uberoff, because Darcy did talk a little bit about baseball. He was commissioner, but Peter Uberoff was the lead, the president of the Olympics in 1984. And they went to give Peter Uberoff an award for the Olympics being successful. And think about what the Olympics are. The Olympics are like schools. It's not just about the competition. There's beauty and there's art and there's learning as cultures come together. And they wanted to give Uberoff this award. And he said, I don't want that award because I really didn't do anything. I encouraged people and I got people to come and help and work. And they all worked together. People from around the world worked together so that the world could experience beauty, art, academics. That's why the closer today, our Mariano Rivera of superintendents, he's a friend, he's a colleague. And, if I'm going to honor the Yankees, I better honor the Mets. The Mets in 1986, their mantra was teamwork makes the dream work. Mm-hmm. And in 1969, it was, you got to believe. So do we have the outlandish audacity to think that if we have the teamwork and we really believe, we can provide what the kids need? Now, just a quick background on my friend, Dr. Egan. Tim cares deeply and he understands there are many facets to education. It's not just about the classroom. He's got his doctorate, the highest level of education you can get, and that's something to be admired because it's a marathon to get that. But Tim is a very, very big supporter of the Boy Scouts, building character. He served on Section 11, and that brings our athletics in. Tim, I've never asked him, and that was a question when you said you don't know something about somebody, but I'm sure Tim has musical and artistic talent he hasn't shared with us yet, but we'll get him to sing at our next meeting. I think that'll be the goal. But last and certainly not least, Tim has given his time generously to the consortium of colleges and superintendents on law, college presidents and superintendents, to bring this full circle. We know education is no longer K through 12, it's K through 16. We have a tremendous respect for the vocational training that BOCES provides for our kids. Tim is actively involved, as you can see, in all the facets of education. And that's why Tim has been chosen today to be our cleanup hitter to kind of close the day. So I am going to turn it over to you, Dr. Egan, my friend and my colleague, to close the day.
Thank you, John, for your kind words and for succinctly summing up our mission here this morning, which was to refocus and rebuild and strengthen our teams as we get back to normalcy in our schools and our district. I want to take this opportunity on behalf of the Suffolk County School Superintendents Association to thank Darcy and our friends at NYSBA for their engaging and extremely informative presentation this morning. And of course, Julie Lutz and the Legislative Committee for putting together our agenda. I think we can all agree in the importance of leadership, especially during turbulent times, the importance of teamwork and leading with unified governance teams, service to community, and especially keeping that service focused on the needs of our students, building trust, respect, and working in a safe place in our teams, and space for sharing various perspectives. And Darcy talked about this morning, and having that safe place to share our perspectives. And maybe most importantly, monitoring, not only embracing, but modeling these concepts and behavior for our communities, especially at our public meetings, The pandemic, unfortunately, has generated a degree of polarization in our country. And it's really important that we, as leadership governance teams, model and embrace the important concepts that Darcy brought forth this morning. At this point in the program, we're going to transition to the team building work back in our districts as we look to spring forward and reconnect with our district's unique goals and important areas of focus. We recognize that each district is in a slightly different place. So the Suffolk County School Superintendents Association has prepared a worksheet that includes a list of questions and items that might serve as a guide for your team to use this structured time that we have this morning, or perhaps visit these items at a later date. And I believe this is going to bring our formal meeting event to a close this morning. Again, on behalf of the association, I want to thank you all for your time, your efforts, your leadership, and everything that you do for the children each and every day. And I'll turn it back over to you, Julie.
Good. Thank you, Tim and John, for setting up the group work. And I wish districts well, those who are taking time this morning to do that group work. We will get out information about where these resources can be found if you want to use them moving forward. And again, Darcy, thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning, for bringing your organization and really your knowledge about how to do this well. So yes. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day and good luck, district teams. We look forward to continuing to serve the students in Suffolk County in partnership with all of you. So I will end the formal meeting now.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Good luck,
Bye-bye.
everyone.